the horrifying story of the Delacroix sisters, Macabre attic, a dark tale. They kept people chained in their attic for more than 10 years. It's the darkest story Lyon has ever known, a tale the French police archives tried to bury for over a century. But today, we're going to uncover what really happened inside that cursed house on Rue Saint-Georges. Before we begin, tell us, where are you listening from? Paris, Marseille, or maybe from across the ocean? Leave a comment below. And if you love dark, true historical stories, subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to hear is only the beginning of a chilling series that will send shivers down your spine. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single tale. Trust me, once you learn what happened in that attic, you'll understand why this case was hidden for so long. Now sit back, turn off the lights if you dare. Because we're going back to Lyon in 1899, a time when shadows hid secrets far more terrifying than anything the imagination could conjure. The autumn of 1899 had painted Lyon in shades of copper and gray. Dead leaves piled up in the narrow alleys of the Croix district, carried by the cold wind sweeping down from the hills. The industrial city hummed with life, silk factories clattering, merchants shouting, and the echo of wooden clogs striking wet cobblestones. But on Rue Saint-Georges, one house stood apart, silent, lifeless. Number 47. A three-story building made of gray stone, its shutters always closed, its facade seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. The attic windows, covered by thick curtains, had never, in anyone's memory, been seen open. This was the home of the Delacroix sisters. Camille and Josette Delacroix were enigmas to everyone in the neighborhood. Both 38 years old, they were heirs to a vast fortune built by their parents, André and Marguerite Delacroix, renowned watchmakers of Lyon, whose timepieces once graced the wrists of Paris's high society. Their parents had died under mysterious circumstances in 1895, a fire in their workshop, its cause never truly explained. The sisters inherited everything: the house, the money, the shares in several textile companies. They could have lived comfortably, married, traveled, enjoyed life. Instead, they chose isolation. Camille the elder was tall and angular, with jet black hair tied into a severe bun. Her pale face looked carved from wax, her high cheekbones and icy blue eyes unblinking. She always wore high-collared black dresses, even in the heat of summer. Her slender hands were perpetually gloved in black. Josette was shorter, rounder, with softer features that might have been pleasant if she ever smiled. But she never did. Her brown eyes stayed downcast, as if she carried an invisible weight on her shoulders. She too dressed in black, as though mourning something that never ended. The sisters only left the house once a week, every Thursday morning, to visit the market at Place des Terreaux. They always walked side by side, silent, buying bread, vegetables, sometimes meat. They spoke to no one, answering merchants only with slight nods. Their shopping was precise, the same items every week. Madame Fournier, the baker at the corner, had tried many times to start a conversation. "Good morning, Mrs. Delacroix. Quite the chill today, isn't it?" Camille would simply place 3 coins on the counter, take 2 baguettes, and leave without a word. "You should come to the Saint Jean festival this summer," the baker once insisted, forcing a smile. "The whole neighborhood will be there." This time Camille. She lifted her eyes. Her gaze was so cold, so hollow that Madame Fournier instinctively stepped back. We do not receive visitors, we do not visit. Good day, madame. Her voice was low, barely more than a whisper, yet it carried an icy authority that left no room for reply. After that day, the shopkeepers stopped trying. The Delacroix sisters became living ghosts in their own neighborhood, present, yet somehow not there. But it wasn't their silence that fed the rumors. It was the sounds. Monsieur Beaumont, the cobbler whose workshop stood right beside number 47, was the first to mention it to his wife. "Did you hear that last night?" he whispered one windy November evening as the gutters moaned. "Hear what?" From number 47, it sounded like chains being dragged. Madame Beaumont laughed nervously. "You're imagining things, dear. It's the shutters banging in the wind." But Monsieur Beaumont shook his head. "No, it was different. And I heard a voice, someone crying out or groaning faint but real, like it came from deep inside." Over the following weeks, other neighbors began reporting similar things. Madame Gerard, who lived across the street, swore she saw a faint light moving behind the attic curtains around 3 in the morning. Young Pierre Dubois, the milk delivery boy, claimed he heard muffled sobs while passing by the front door at dawn. And then there was the smell. It came occasionally, especially when the wind blew from the north, a strange, sickly stench drifting from the house. It wasn't sewage, it wasn't garbage. It was something organic, something rotten. The kind of smell that made passers-by quicken their steps without knowing why. By December 1899, the rumors had grown so loud that Father Matthew, the priest of St. Bruno Parish, decided to intervene. He was a man in his 60s, with a white beard and gentle eyes that had seen too much suffering. During his long ministry, he had witnessed many kinds of misery, but nothing could have prepared him for number 47. One gray afternoon, Bible in hand and heart full of goodwill, he walked to the Delacroix house. He knocked on the heavy wooden door, once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. He knew they were home. He had seen Camille enter just an hour before. "Mademoiselle Delacroix," he called softly, "it's Father Matthew. I've come to see how you're doing. We haven't seen you at Mass lately." A long silence, then slow footsteps. The door opened slightly, held in place by a chain. Camille appeared in the narrow gap. Her face was paler than ever, almost translucent in the dim hallway. "We need nothing, Father." "I understand, my child," he replied gently, "but the church is here too." "We need nothing." Her tone was firm, but it wasn't her voice that unsettled him most. It was what he glimpsed behind her, in the darkness of the hall. At the foot of the staircase leading upstairs, something caught the faint light, a chain. A long, iron chain, its far end disappearing into the shadows of the steps. Before he could speak, the door slammed shut with a harsh metallic snap. Father Matthew stood motionless on the doorstep for several minutes, his heart pounding. He whispered a prayer, turned away and walked home, haunted by the image of that chain. That night he couldn't sleep. 2 days later, he went to the central police station of Lyon to see Inspector Gabriel Leroux. Leroux was a weary man. At 50, he had seen enough poverty, corruption, and death to lose all illusions about human nature. His graying hair was perpetually disheveled, his mustache uneven, and his brown eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen too much. But he was thorough, perhaps too thorough for his own good. When Father Matthew came to his office that December morning and told him about the Delacroix sisters, Leroux was skeptical. My dear father, with all due respect, chains inside a house do not constitute a crime. Perhaps they own a dog. That was not a dog's chain, Inspector, the priest insisted. It was wrought iron heavy, and there's something wrong in that house, something evil. Leroux sighed. Clergymen often had a taste for drama. The neighbors speak of noises, of cries, of a strange smell, Father Matthew continued. These women see no one. They never go out. Something is not right, Inspector. I can feel it in my soul. Against his better judgment, Inspector Leroux agreed to conduct a discreet investigation. He began by questioning the neighbors. Monsieur Beaumont confirmed the nighttime noises. Madame Girard described the moving lights in the attic. Young Pierre Dubois told of the sobs he heard at dawn. But none of them had ever seen anything tangible, no victims, no visible violence. Just sounds, light, smells. There was nothing. Not enough to obtain a search warrant. Leroux then consulted the municipal records. The Delacroix sisters had no criminal records. They paid their taxes down to the last cent. Officially, they disturbed no one. He almost dropped the case, but something held him back, an intuition, a disquiet he could not name. In January 1900, he decided to watch the house discreetly. For several nights in a row, he posted himself in an adjacent alley, muffled in his coat, watching number 47. Most of the time, nothing happened. The house remained dark and silent like a tomb. But on the fourth night at 2 in the morning, he saw something. A light came on in the attic, not an electric light. Lyon was only beginning to install those, but the trembling glow of an oil lantern. Then he heard faint voices carried on the icy wind, 2 women speaking, and then another sound, a noise that chilled his blood. A short, muffled cry, unmistakably a cry of distress. Leroux straightened, every sense alert. He waited, holding his breath, but the silence fell again. The light went out. The next morning, Leroux went to see his superior, Commissioner Blanchard, a burly man with an impressive mustache and a decided taste for cognac. Gabriel, on what basis are you asking me for a search warrant? Noises, a light in an attic, Blanchard said. I heard a cry, Commissioner, a cry for help. In a city of 500,000, you hear cries every night, drunks, domestic quarrels, lovers in heat. It's not enough. What if someone is being held prisoner? Blanchard rolled his eyes. The Delacroix are a respectable family. Their father was a renowned watchmaker. You cannot violate the home of 2 ladies of the upper bourgeoisie without solid proof. Now, go and knock on their door officially and ask questions. Blanchard thought for a long moment, drumming his fingers on his desk. All right, but you go alone, quietly, and if they refuse to speak, you drop it. Understand? Understood. That same afternoon, Leroux presented himself at number 47. He knocked on the door, his police badge in plain sight. After a long moment, the door opened, not Camille this time, but Josette. She was even smaller than he had imagined, almost fragile in her tight black dress. Her face was round, with features that might have been soft, but her eyes were red as if she had been crying recently. Her voice was barely a whisper. Mademoiselle Delacroix, I am Inspector Leroux of the Lyon police. I would like to ask you a few questions. Josette's eyes widened. A look of pure panic crossed her face. We have done nothing wrong. I am not accusing you, mademoiselle, but concerns have been raised by your neighbors, unusual noises. I only want to make sure everything is all right. Everything is fine. Her voice trembled. She was lying, it was obvious. May I come in, just to take a quick look? No, mademoiselle, you have no warrant. You cannot enter. She knew the law. Someone had taught her. Before Leroux could respond, another voice rose from inside the house. "Josette, who is there?" Camille, cold, authoritative. Josette flinched as if slapped. It's the police, Camille." Swift footsteps. Camille appeared behind her sister, towering over her. Her icy stare landed on Leroux. "Inspector, if you had a warrant you would have shown it. You have no right to be here." "I have the right to ask questions, and we have the right not to answer. Good day." She grabbed Josette's arm. Leroux saw Camille's fingers sink into her sister's flesh. Josette grimaced in pain as the door shut. Leroux stood there, frustrated and powerless. Yet something had happened in those few seconds before the door closed. Something important. He had glimpsed the staircase that led up to the upper floors behind the two women, and at the foot of that staircase, exactly as Father Matthew had described, was a chain, a heavy iron chain. But that was not all. On one of the links he had seen something that made his heart leap: dried blood. The following months were a torment for Inspector Leroux. He knew that something horrible was happening at number 47, but his hands were tied by the law and by bureaucratic inertia. He continued to surveil the house when he could, but the Delacroix sisters grew even more reclusive. They hardly went out at all. Their purchases were now delivered. Leroux questioned the deliverymen, but none ever entered the house. They left packages on the threshold, received payment through a slot beneath the door, and left. The house had become a fortress. In March 1900, Leroux made one last attempt to convince the commissioner. Not enough to obtain a search warrant. Leroux then checked the municipal records. The Delacroix sisters had no criminal records. They paid their taxes down to the last cent. Officially, they bothered no one. He nearly dropped the case, but something held him back: an intuition, a disquiet he could not name. In January 1900, he decided to watch the house discreetly. For several nights in a row, he posted himself in an adjacent alley, wrapped in his coat, watching number 47. Most of the time, nothing happened. The house remained dark and silent like a tomb. But on the fourth night, at 2 in the morning, he saw something. A light had come on in the attic, not an electric light. Lyon was only beginning to install those, but the flickering glow of an oil lantern. Then he heard faint voices carried on the icy wind, 2 women speaking, and then another sound. A noise that chilled his blood. A short, muffled cry, unmistakably a cry of distress. Leroux straightened, every sense on edge. He waited, holding his breath, but silence fell again. The light went out. The next morning, Leroux went to see his superior, Commissioner Blanchard, a portly man with an imposing mustache and a fondness for cognac. "Blanchard, this chain, sir, I saw blood on it." "You think you saw blood in the gloom of a hallway? It could be rust. And look at the expression on the younger sister's face. She was afraid, terrible fear. Maybe she's just afraid of the police. Many honest people are afraid of us. Monsieur Gabriel, listen to me. We have real crimes to solve: thefts, murders, assaults. I cannot mobilize resources on the basis of your intuitions. If you obtain concrete evidence, a witness, a victim, something tangible, then we will act. Otherwise, leave those women alone." Leroux left his superior's office with a bitter taste in his mouth. He knew what that meant. He was alone, but he could not give up. Time passed. The summer of 1900 came hot and oppressive. Lyon sweltered under the heat wave. The streets reeked of accumulated refuse, and flies buzzed around the markets. Then in September, everything changed. An old man came to the police station. He was probably in his 70s, stooped and with trembling hands. His name was Henry Martel, and he had a story to tell. "My daughter," he said to Leroux in a broken voice. My daughter Marie, she disappeared 5 years ago. She was 18. She worked as a seamstress. One day she went out to deliver an order and she never came back. Leroux checked the records. Indeed, a Marie Martel had been reported missing in 1895. The police had investigated but with no result. In a city as large as Lyon, disappearances were not uncommon. I'm sorry, Mr. Martel, but wait, let me finish. 2 days ago I met an old neighbor of mine, Madame Rousseau. We talked about Marie, as one does sometimes to keep her memory alive, and she told me something she never mentioned to the police. Leroux sat up. What is it? The day Marie disappeared, Madame Rousseau saw her on Rue Saint-Georges. She was carrying a dress, an order for clients. She was heading toward a house, number 47. Leroux's blood ran cold. Number 47, Rue Saint-Georges. Yes, Madame Rousseau is certain. She remembers because Marie waved to her before going in. That was the last time she was seen. Why didn't your neighbor tell anyone at the time? The old man shrugged helplessly. She didn't know Marie had gone missing. She left Lyon soon after to care for her sick sister in Grenoble. She only just returned. Leroux felt his heart quicken. Finally, he had something concrete. Mr. Martel, would you be willing to testify officially, to sign a statement? Of course, if it can help find my daughter. 2 hours later, Leroux was back in Commissioner Blanchard's office with the signed statements of Henry Martel and of Madame Rousseau, who had been summoned immediately. This is the proof you asked for, Commissioner. A potential victim last seen entering number 47. Blanchard read the document, his brows knitting. That was 5 years ago. Yes, but it's a direct link to this house. The Delacroix sisters are seamstresses. Still, they could have been hired to make the dress. Blanchard sighed deeply, then nodded. Very well. You have your warrant, but Gabriel, if you find nothing, this case will be closed for good. Understood. Understood. On September 15, 1900 at 6:00 a.m., Inspector Leroux presented himself at number 47 Rue Saint-Georges accompanied by 4 police officers. The sky was overcast and threatening. A fine drizzle coated Lyon, making the cobbles slick. Leroux knocked on the door hard with authority. Police, open up. We have a search warrant. No answer. He knocked again, still nothing. Breach the door. 2 agents stepped forward with an improvised battering ram. On the 3rd blow, the lock gave way and the door opened with a sinister creak. The stench that poured from the house made the policemen recoil. It was an unbearable, nauseating smell, rotten flesh, excrement, and something chemical, like formaldehyde. Leroux pressed a handkerchief to his nose and entered. The interior of the house was dark, the shutters closed, letting only a thin gray light in. The hallway was narrow, the wallpaper faded and peeling in places. And there, at the foot of the staircase, exactly as he had seen before, the chain. Search the ground floor and the first floor, ordered Leroux. I'll go up to the attic. 2 officers accompanied him up the stairs. The wooden steps groaned beneath their feet. The smell grew stronger as they climbed. On the 2nd floor they found the sisters' bedrooms, beds neatly made, wardrobes full of identical black dresses, nothing untoward. But at the end of the corridor a locked door stood closed, and from that door the odor emanated. Open it. An officer shouldered the door in. What they discovered inside made one of the policemen on the scene. The attic of number 47 was a vast room stretching across the entire width of the house. The slanted ceiling was low, crisscrossed by wooden beams blackened with age. The only light came from two small, grimy windows, covered on the inside with thick curtains that allowed only a pale, ghostly glow to seep through. But it wasn't the architecture that made one of the officers scream. It was what was inside the room. Chains everywhere, fixed to the beams, the walls, the floor. Some were rusted, others still shone as if recently polished. At the end of many of these chains hung restraints, iron manacles, collars, ankle shackles. In the center of the room stood three wooden tables, makeshift operating tables, covered in dark stains. Beside them lay instruments, scalpels, forceps, needles, jars filled with cloudy liquids. Against the back wall stood a series of shelves, and on those shelves— "My God," whispered Leroux, his voice strangled. "Jars, dozens of glass jars filled with formaldehyde. And inside those jars, human organs, hearts, kidneys, chunks of flesh that could no longer be identified. But the worst, the most horrifying of all were the bodies. There were three of them, arranged in alcoves carved into the walls like funeral niches. But they weren't buried, they were preserved. Two women and one young man, probably in his 20s. Their bodies were in an unnatural state of preservation, not mummified, not decomposed, but frozen, as if death had struck them only hours ago rather than years. Their skin was waxy, slightly yellowed. Their eyes were closed, their hands folded over their chests. They wore old-fashioned clothing, dresses, and a suit from the 1890s. One of the officers vomited in a corner. Another bolted out of the attic, gasping for air. Leroux forced himself to move forward, despite the horror tightening around his throat. He pulled out his notebook and began taking notes with a trembling hand. Three bodies, unnatural state of preservation, multiple medical instruments, jars containing organs, chains, and restraint devices. He approached one of the women. Her hair was long, brown, neatly combed. Her hands were crossed over her chest, and around her neck he noticed something, a necklace. A simple silver chain with a heart-shaped locket. Leroux carefully opened the locket. Inside, a tiny photograph, an elderly couple smiling. His stomach twisted. This woman had had a family, parents who loved her, who had perhaps waited for her return for years. As he was still examining the bodies, Leroux heard noises downstairs, voices. The agents had found someone. He hurried down, leaving two policemen to continue the grim inventory of the attic. On the ground floor, in the dark living room where the furniture was shrouded in dusty covers, the two Delacroix sisters sat side by side on a sofa, framed by two officers. They wore their habitual plain black dresses, and their faces were deathly pale in the gray morning light. Camille sat upright and rigid, her icy gaze fixed on an invisible point ahead of her. She neither trembled nor cried. She simply sat there, still as a marble statue. Josette, however, was sobbing quietly. Her body shuddered with spasms. Her hands were clasped tightly on her knees, knuckles white from the pressure. Leroux stepped forward, struggling to keep his voice steady despite the rage boiling inside him. "Mademoiselles Delacroix, by the authority of the law, you are under arrest for unlawful confinement, murder, and desecration of corpses." Camille did not react, not a word, not a twitch. Josette raised her tear-streaked face toward him. "I'm sorry," she whispered in a broken voice. "I'm so sorry." "Be silent, Josette." Camille's voice cracked like a whip, cold, commanding. Josette shrank immediately, like a scolded child. "You will say nothing without a lawyer present." Camille continued, now addressing Leroux directly. And I suggest you check your procedures carefully. Any irregularity in this arrest will be used against you. Even now, even faced with the monstrous evidence of her crimes, she remained in control, cold, calculated, unshaken. Leroux shuddered. He had arrested dozens of criminals in his career, but never had he met anyone so devoid of humanity. Take them away, he ordered. Separate cells, no communication between them. As they were led out, Josette turned one last time toward the house, and in her eyes, Leroux saw something he would never forget, not guilt, not remorse, but relief. In the days that followed, the investigation revealed the true extent of the horror that had taken place inside number 47. The coroner, Dr. Armand Peltier, a meticulous man in his 50s the man with the gold-rimmed glasses and a surgeon's precision in his reports, had examined the 3 bodies found in the attic. The report he presented to Inspector Leroux in his office, which smelled of formaldehyde and cold tobacco, was as fascinating as it was horrifying. "Inspector," he began, "in 30 years of service I've never seen anything like this. These bodies were preserved using a method I cannot fully identify. It's not traditional embalming. The process seems to involve a series of chemical injections. I found traces of formaldehyde, of course, but also other compounds I haven't yet identified. Mercury, perhaps, arsenic, definitely." Leroux leaned forward, his face pale. "But how long have they been dead?" Dr. Peltier removed his glasses and slowly wiped them, a gesture he always made when disturbed. "That's where it gets strange," he said. "Based on their clothing and the minimal state of decomposition, I'd estimate between 4 and 6 years. But the condition of preservation suggests regular maintenance, procedures performed perhaps weekly, to keep the bodies in that state." "Were they tortured?" "It's difficult to say with certainty," Peltier replied, "because of the chemical preservation, but yes, I believe so. I found ligature marks on the wrists and ankles, old fractures that healed poorly, and on one of the bodies, the man, traces of what appear to be surgical incisions. Someone experimented on them." Leroux closed his eyes, fighting nausea. "Cause of death," Peltier continued. "For 2 of them, probably hemorrhage from mutilation. For the 3rd, the woman with the silver necklace, suffocation or poisoning. I can't be more precise." The identification of the victims had taken time, but thanks to the clothing and personal effects found in the attic, the police had managed to reconstruct their identities. The woman with the silver necklace was Marie Martel, daughter of old Henry Martel. She was 23 when she died, likely in 1895, the year she disappeared. The locket contained a photograph of her parents. The young man was Laurent Dubois, 19, an apprentice carpenter who vanished in 1896. He had a distinctive birthmark on his left shoulder, noted by his mother when he went missing. The 3rd victim was Elise Morrow, 22, a schoolteacher who disappeared in 1887. She was found still wearing her engagement ring. 3 lives, 3 families destroyed, but why? Inspector Leroux spent weeks scouring the Delacroix house, searching for answers. In a locked room on the 1st floor, he found the sisters' personal library. The shelves were heavy with books, but not ordinary ones. Treatises on anatomy, manuals of chemistry, texts on Egyptian embalming, volumes about the preservation of biological tissue, and dozens of notebooks filled with tight, meticulous handwriting, Camille's handwriting. Leroux read them night after night, a single candle burning beside him, a bottle of cognac within reach to calm his nerves. What he discovered defied comprehension. The Delacroix sisters, heirs to a vast fortune, left isolated and alone after their parents' deaths, had embarked on a macabre enterprise to uncover the secret of perfect bodily preservation. Their father, a clockmaker, had been obsessed with time, with its measure, its mastery, its control. That obsession had twisted within Camille. She sought to defeat time itself by halting decay. In her notebooks, Camille described her experiments with chilling precision. She detailed how she lured her victims, sewing commissions, job offers, promises of aid to desperate young people, how she drugged them, how she chained them in the attic. Then the experiments began. Injections of various substances, careful observations of their effects on living tissue, trials of multiple preservation methods. Everything was recorded with a scientific coldness that froze Leroux's blood, as if she were describing experiments on lab animals, not human beings. Subject A, Marie M., displayed notable resistance to diluted formaldehyde. Screaming and convulsions lasted 47 minutes before loss of consciousness. Preservation of superficial tissue satisfactory. Internal organs show early necrosis. Must test intraarterial injection next time. Page after page clinical horror. Leroux had to stop several times, unable to continue reading. One entry haunted him for weeks. Josette cried again today during the procedure. She does not understand the importance of our work. She sees only suffering, not progress. Father would have been disappointed in her weakness, but she obeys. She will always obey. That single line revealed everything. Josette wasn't merely an accomplice. She was a victim herself, enslaved by her elder sister's psychological domination. Forced to participate in atrocities she lacked the strength to refuse. But that didn't absolve her. She still helped. She fed the prisoners. She cleaned after the experiments. She arranged the preserved bodies. And when the horror was finally discovered, she said only one thing before she was taken away. Camille promised they'd never leave us. The trial began in February 1901, and all of Lyon was in uproar. Newspapers published daily articles about the diabolical sisters of Rue St. George's. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, demanding the death penalty. Throughout the entire trial, Camille Delacroix remained utterly expressionless. She showed no emotion, no remorse. When the prosecutor read aloud her own notes, detailing the tortures inflicted on her victims, she listened with the calm detachment of someone hearing a recipe. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" the judge asked. She lifted her gaze, scanning the packed courtroom. "I sought to push the limits of science to conquer death itself. What I achieved should have been celebrated, not condemned. In 100 years, my work will be recognized for its true worth." A horrified silence filled the room. Even her lawyer was speechless. Josette, on the other hand, wept through the entire trial. Her voice trembled as she testified, explaining how Camille had manipulated her, terrorized her, and forced her to participate. She said it was for science, to honor our parents' memory. "I was afraid of her. I was always afraid of her, but I was never strong enough to stop her or to save them." The verdict came on March 15, 1901. Camille Delacroix, guilty of 3 counts of premeditated murder and torture, sentenced to death by guillotine. Josette Delacroix, guilty of complicity in murder and failure to assist persons in danger, sentenced to life confinement in a psychiatric asylum. Camille was executed at dawn on May 3, 1901, in the courtyard of St. Paul Prison in Lyon. According to witnesses, she climbed the scaffold without a tremor, without a single tear. Her final words, spoken clearly and calmly, froze the blood of all present. "Time never stops, but I stopped it for them, forever." The blade fell a second later. Josette was interned at the Braun Asylum, a grim institution a few miles east of Lyon. She spent the next 3 years in a padded cell, often refusing to speak or eat, rocking back and forth for hours. Doctors described her condition as deep melancholia with hysterical manifestations. A vague diagnosis hiding the truth. She had been utterly broken, her mind destroyed by years under her sister's domination and by the horrors she had witnessed. She died in 1924 at the age of 62 from tuberculosis. Her last words, whispered to a nurse, were, "Forgive me, Marie, forgive me." The house at number 47, Rue St. Georges, was sealed by order of the city. Nobody wanted it. Nobody dared enter. Inspector Leroux, who had devoted nearly 2 years of his life to the case, retired in 1905. He moved to a small village near Annecy, far from Lyon, far from the memories. Yet until his death in 1918, he suffered from recurring nightmares, always the same one. He climbed the staircase of number 47. He heard chains dragging across the floor. He reached a door that opened slowly, and he always woke before seeing what was behind it. The families of the victims requested the bodies for a proper burial, but Dr. Peltier advised full cremation due to the toxic chemicals in the tissue. The ashes were returned to the families, who buried them in the Loyes Cemetery, on the hills overlooking Lyon. A simple gravestone marked the spot, engraved with 3 names: Marie Martel, Laurent Dubois, Elise Moreau. Below, a modest epitaph: "Victims of madness, rest in peace." Henry Martel, Marie's father, came to the grave every single day until his own death 2 years after the trial. People said he died of grief. But the story didn't end with the executions or the burials. Number 47 continued to haunt the neighborhood. In the years that followed, several residents reported strange phenomena. These weren't foolish superstitions or ghost stories. They were something more tangible, more disturbing. Neighbors swore they heard noises at night, not moans, not clinking chains, but something else. The house was empty, sealed shut, yet they heard unexplained creaks, footsteps, as if something or someone moved inside. In 1907, a group of young men from the neighborhood, emboldened by alcohol and bravado, decided to break in. They wanted to see the infamous attic of horror everyone still whispered about. They managed to pry open a ground floor window and slipped inside. One of them, Jules Moreau, no relation to the victim, Elise Moreau, later told a journalist from the Progrès de Lyon what happened next. "There were 5 of us. We had lanterns. The house stank of rot and mildew. Everything was covered in dust, cobwebs everywhere. We laughed, joked, but it was nervous laughter, you understand. We're afraid, but they wouldn't admit it. We went up to the attic. The door was open. Someone must have forced the lock after the trial, and when we went in, my God, it was empty. The police had taken everything away, the chains, the tables, the jars, but the smell was still there. Not just the smell of rot, but something else, something chemical, nauseating. And then we saw the walls. They were covered in marks, scratches, dozens, hundreds of scratches, as if someone had clawed at the plaster with their fingernails for hours. And in one corner, written in what looked like dried blood, a single word repeated again and again across the whole surface of the wall. Sorry, 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 sorry. One of my friends started screaming. We all panicked. We rushed for the stairs. We shoved each other. One of us fell. He broke his arm. We ran without looking back. I never set foot on that street again. Never. The paper ran the article, but many treated it as sensational exaggeration. Yet after that incident, no one tried to enter the house again. In 1923, the municipality finally decided to demolish the building. It had become a burden, a constant reminder of a horror everyone wanted to forget. The workers assigned to the demolition started with the roof, then the upper floors. When they reached the attic, several of them refused to continue. The foreman, a pragmatic man named Albert Roux, had to raise the wages by 30% to persuade his men to finish the job. What they discovered when they tore down the attic walls was never officially reported, but rumors circulated. Behind a false wall, they supposedly found more bodies, not 3, not 4, but 7 other people who had never been identified, never claimed, never mourned. Likely indigents, people whose disappearance nobody would notice, lost souls unfortunate enough to have crossed the path of the Delacroix sisters. The municipality allegedly disposed of those bodies in secret, fearing that disclosure would reignite the scandal and damage Lyon's image. Was that true? Impossible to say for certain. Municipal archives from that period were lost in a 1944 fire during the German occupation. Convenient, some said. The lot where number 47 once stood remained empty for decades. No one wanted to build there. People said it was because of poor soil quality and unstable foundations, but the old-timers in the neighborhood knew the real reason. It was only in 1967 that a pragmatic real estate developer, a man who did not believe in stories, bought the lot and built a modern apartment building on it. Today, in 2025, the building still stands, 6 floors, balconies with window boxes, apartments with views over Lyon. Banal, ordinary. But if you speak with the tenants, some will tell you strange things. Noises at night, footsteps over their ceiling when there's no one on the floor above. A smell that appears sometimes for no reason, chemical, sickening, and then disappears as quickly as it came. And in apartment 3B, roughly where the old attic was, tenants never stay more than a few months. They leave without explanation, abandoning their belongings. They refuse to talk about what they saw or heard. The last tenant, a young woman named Sophie, moved out in the middle of the night in 2024, leaving half her things behind. She refused to give a reason, but her landlord noticed she was shaking when she handed over the keys. The apartment has been empty ever since. No one wants it. The French police archives still hold the Delacroix case files, but they are sealed under lock in the basement of the Lyon courthouse. By law, they should be accessible to the public. The case is over a century old, but every time a historian or journalist requests to consult them, the request is refused for administrative reasons. What is in those files that the authorities do not want revealed? Some think it's the discovery of the 7 additional bodies. Others believe there are details about Camille's experiments that are too horrible to make public, methods, techniques that might inspire other deranged minds. Or perhaps it is something that even Inspector Leroux did not put into his official reports. Something he took to his grave that haunted him every night. In a private letter to his wife found after his death in 1918, Leroux wrote a few enigmatic lines. "My darling, I cannot tell you everything I saw in that cursed house. Not just the bodies, not just the instruments of torture, but what was written in Camille's final notebook. The notebook I was never allowed to include in the evidence. What she planned to do next, whom she intended to target. I took that notebook, I destroyed it, I burned it in the fireplace of my office, and watched the pages turn to ash until nothing but embers remained. Some things should never be known. Some ideas should never be planted in the minds of men. May God forgive me for what I've done, but I would have slept even less if I hadn't done it. What was in that final notebook? No one will ever know. Today, if you walk down Rue St. George's in Lyon, you'll find no plaque, no memorial. Nothing indicates that one of the darkest criminal cases in French history unfolded there. The city wanted to forget, to bury that story as one buries a corpse. But history does not like to be buried. 3 years ago, in 2022, during renovation work in the basement of the modern building that now stands where number 47 once stood, workers made a discovery. Beneath layers of concrete and soil, they found a hidden trapdoor. It led to a small underground room, one that appeared on no architectural plan of the old Delacroix house. Inside, they found chains fixed to the wall, a stone table and carvings covering every inch of the surface. Not words, but symbols, anatomical diagrams, and chemical formulas. And in the center of the room, lying neatly on the table as if waiting to be found, was a notebook bound in black leather, its pages yellowed with age. On the first page, in fine, precise handwriting, the unmistakable hand of Camille Delacroix, were the words, "If you are reading this, it means my work is not finished. Time never stops, but we can learn to control it. The methods are in this book, continue, for science, for eternity." The workers immediately called the police. The notebook was seized, sealed, and according to official reports, destroyed for reasons of public safety. But was it really destroyed? 6 months later, an anonymous blog post appeared online claiming the notebook still existed, kept secretly in a vault somewhere within the French National Archives. The author claimed to be an archivist who had seen it personally. "The pages contain details I cannot describe here," the author wrote. "Methods of preservation that surpass our current understanding of science. Techniques that, if ever reproduced, could. I won't. All I can say is this notebook must never see the light of day. Never." The blog was deleted a few days later. The author was never identified. And so the story ends here. But the shadow of number 47 still hangs over Lyon. Parents in the city still whisper the story of the Delacroix sisters to their children, to teach them caution. Never speak to strangers. Never follow someone you don't know. Because evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it hides behind ordinary faces. Behind closed doors. Behind the polished mask of respectability. Camille and Josette Delacroix were women of high society, educated, wealthy, respected. No one would have suspected them. And that's exactly why they were able to act with impunity for years. How many Maries, Lawrence, and Elizas could have been saved if someone had dared to look behind those shuttered windows? If someone had taken the sounds in the night seriously? Inspector Leroux tried. He followed his instincts despite bureaucratic resistance, but he arrived too late to save the 3 identified victims, and perhaps too late to save the others. This case reminds us of a disturbing truth. Monsters exist. They don't have horns or claws. They wear black dresses and gloves. They say good morning politely. They pay their taxes, and they wait patiently for you to let your guard down. If this story moved you, if it made you think, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, tell us what you believe, and above all, subscribe to the channel. Because the dark history of humanity is filled with stories like this, true, documented, terrifying. Stories that must be told, so we never forget and never repeat. Turn on the notification bell. The next story will be even more disturbing. Take care of yourself. And if one day you walk past a modern building on Rue St. George's in Lyon, remember what happened there. Remember the attic. Remember the chains. And remember that sometimes walls have memories,